Hey everyone! Welcome back to Anime Octopus. Today, we're diving into another exciting chapter of our fanfiction series. What if Kakashi raised Naruko? Part 3. Disclaimer: this content is purely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not own any of the anime footage used, all rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Alright, let's jump right in. Over the course of the next week, the interrogation unit worked diligently with the captured individuals. Every detainee underwent questioning, and while some cooperated readily, others presented a challenge. The unit had full authorization to extract information using specialized techniques designed to apply psychological and physical pressure without causing lasting harm. It soon became evident who had been involved in the kidnapping attempt. By the end of the week, all prisoners had been interrogated, processed, and placed in custody, awaiting a formal hearing before the council. The gathered intelligence was immediately delivered to the Hokage. The third Hokage sat behind his desk, reviewing the report with a deep sense of dismay. His expression darkened as he silently read through the details. According to the report, Genbu Satoshi had been hired by Kakashi Shin, a wealthy businessman from the northern district. Shin had lost his eldest son during the Kyuubi attack and, driven by grief, sought what he believed to be justice. Willing to pay a substantial sum, he commissioned Genbu and his men to abduct the Jinchuriki, Naruko, and bring her to Training Ground 5. Satoshi suggested the location to ensure secrecy. Shin had also arranged for several members of his family to witness the event, as they, too, had supported the plan. Genbu accepted the assignment and began formulating a strategy to locate the child. While gathering information, Genbu overheard a conversation between Tomoya Sarahara and another man regarding Naruko. Displeased with what he heard, Genbu decided to follow Tomoya. His surveillance led him to the Sarahara residence, where he observed Tomoya reunite with his wife, Rei, after her time away from home. Tomoya inquired about her well-being, to which Rei reassured him that everything was fine. Sensing that she might be connected to the child's whereabouts, Genbu decided to monitor her movements closely. Rei left home every other day, heading toward the village outskirts along the southern perimeter. Suspecting she was visiting Naruko, Genbu began trailing her. However, Rei quickly noticed she was being followed and skillfully misled Genbu away from the actual location. Once he lost sight of her, Genbu returned to confront Tomoya directly. Pressuring him, Genbu presented an ultimatum: either Tomoya discovered the child's location and led them there, or his family would be in danger. Fearing for his loved ones, Tomoya reluctantly agreed to gather the information. It took over 2 weeks, but Tomoya eventually uncovered Naruko's location. With this knowledge, Genbu and his team made their preparations. Meanwhile, word of the planned attack spread among certain villagers, and many beyond Shin's family expressed interest in witnessing the event. Ultimately, 30 individuals intended to be present at Training Ground 5 on the designated day. On the day of the operation, Tomoya guided Genbu's team toward Naruko's residence. However, they encountered significant resistance, not only from defensive traps set around the house but also from the guardians trained Ninken. Anticipating a difficult confrontation, Genbu had assembled over 20 men, aware that Kakashi, Naruko's guardian, was a highly skilled former Onbu. Fortunately for them, Kakashi was not present at the time, but the Guardian's protective measures proved formidable. Inside the house, Rei refused to surrender and fiercely defended Naruko, even against her own husband. A battle broke out, and in the ensuing struggle, Tomoya was ultimately defeated. Rei managed to overpower him and eliminate 2 other intruders before sustaining critical injuries herself. Genbu quickly sensed Kakashi's approach and swiftly took the child, making haste to retreat to the designated meeting point. Upon arrival, the villagers, along with Kakashi Shin, were already waiting. A prior agreement had been made that as soon as Genbu located the child, he would report the exact date and time for Shin's arrival. Only then would the payment be exchanged, as Shin wanted to ensure their transaction remained discreet. The Hokage, frustrated, slammed the scroll onto his desk. He knew the council would attempt to plead for leniency on behalf of the offender. Moreover, the influential Shin family would likely try to sway the council members in their favor. This was a situation that required careful handling to prevent similar incidents in the future. Additionally, the Hokage needed to ensure that none of the remaining ninja who had accompanied Genbu would retain any memory of Kakashi's residence. For such a delicate task, Inoiki's expertise would be essential. Summoning one of the Anbu guards, the Hokage called for Ram, who promptly appeared and stood at attention, awaiting orders. "Ram, I need you to bring Inochi here immediately, and also summon Elder Shikaku." "Yes, sir." With that, Ram disappeared in a puff of smoke. Kakashi carried Naruko with him as he made his way to the hospital. Leaving the baby behind was not an option. He knew that Rei would want to see Naruko anyway. However, he felt uneasy about taking Naruko out into the village. Even though those responsible for the incident were now in custody, Kakashi couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He preferred to stay close to home, where he knew Naruko was safe. It had been over 3 weeks since the kidnapping, and in all that time, he never went anywhere without Naruko. If a task required leaving her behind, he simply refused to go. So much had been weighing on his mind since that day. However, at this moment, his focus was on bringing Naruko to see Rei. From what the Hokage had told him, Rei had been innocent all along. That truth brought both relief and sadness. If she had never been involved, her life wouldn't have been so drastically altered. Her injuries had been severe but not permanent: multiple puncture wounds, slashes, a concussion, a broken left arm, and 3 cracked ribs. The doctors estimated she would need about 6 weeks to fully recover, with 2 more weeks remaining before her discharge. Every conversation with the medical staff was filled with cautionary advice about her condition. Now, on a bright, late morning in early spring, Kakashi moved swiftly across the rooftops toward the hospital. Upon arrival, he skillfully descended to the ground and entered the building without hesitation. He went straight to the front desk and asked for Rei's room number. The nurse at the counter looked at him with mild irritation, recognizing him instantly. Kakashi instinctively held Naruko closer, securing her with one arm while gently cradling her head with his other hand. He didn't want anyone to notice the baby. Sensing something was off, Naruko remained completely still and silent. Ever since the incident, she had become even more attuned to Kakashi's emotions, understanding when to stay quiet. The nurse hesitated, as though reluctant to provide the information. For a brief moment, Kakashi feared she might refuse outright or even ask them to leave. The seconds stretched uncomfortably, but at last, she spoke. "Second floor, room 210, she muttered under her breath. "Thank you," Kakashi replied, turning to leave. However, the nurse's next words stopped him in his tracks. "Why are you carrying a baby? I hope that child isn't yours. You'll only end up failing them, just like your father never understood what truly mattered." A surge of frustration welled up inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't afford to let people like this create trouble for him and Naruko. Tiger's words echoed in his mind, reminding him to stay composed. With a steady voice, laced with restrained anger, he responded, "You should choose your words more carefully. We are not what you assume us to be." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and continued toward Rei's room, determined to focus on what truly mattered, keeping Naruko safe and supporting those who had been there for him. The nurse chose to remain silent, understanding from the look in his eyes and the tone of his voice that it was best not to say anything further. Kakashi stepped away from the counter and made his way toward the staircase. He inwardly sighed, realizing he had forgotten to disguise himself before entering the village. If he was being truthful with himself, his mind had been preoccupied, not just with the events of the past 2 weeks but also with memories from his past resurfacing. No matter how much he wanted to leave them behind, they always found a way to return at the most unexpected moments, reminding him of his regrets and the things he had lost. Snapping out of his thoughts, Kakashi suddenly felt a small tug at his mask. Looking down, he saw Naruko determinedly trying to pull it off. The young girl had one hand firmly grasping the fabric, her expression filled with concentration as she attempted to succeed in her mission. Kakashi couldn't help but chuckle at her persistence, amused by his little sister's playful antics. "Hey there, little one, Kakashi said with a chuckle. I know you're not a fan of my mask, but you're going to have to get used to seeing me like this when we're out. Okay? Naruko let out a small huff but released her grip, only to try again moments later. Once more, Kakashi had to pause, adjusting his mask, which had slipped slightly down his face. However, he never grew frustrated with her persistence. In a way, it warmed his heart. Naruko was the only one, aside from his father, to have seen his face. No one else ever had, and as far as Kakashi was concerned, that would never change. They finally reached the second floor. Kakashi stepped forward, opening the door and leading the way into the corridor. By now, Naruko had settled down, realizing that removing the mask was a lost cause. Instead, she turned her attention to their surroundings, curious about where they were heading. Kakashi continued down the hall, stopping just before the corner where they needed to turn right. There, in bold numbers, stood door 210. Without hesitation, Kakashi knocked before stepping inside. Rei was awake, but she wasn't alone. Her mother and 3 children were also present. Internally, Kakashi felt a wave of unease. He didn't want this to escalate into an argument, let alone anything worse. He debated whether to step forward or quietly retreat. Rei turned her gaze toward the 2 newcomers, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. They looked so lost, so vulnerable. A part of her longed to take them in, to give them the warmth of a family. But she knew that wasn't possible, not now. She glanced at her mother, who studied the pair with an unreadable expression. The children, on the other hand, remained oblivious to the tension in the room. Rei knew this wasn't the right moment for these 2 groups to meet, if such a moment could ever exist. Clearing her throat to break the silence, she spoke firmly. Mother, please take the children to the cafeteria for about 30 minutes. Her mother hesitated. Are you sure, dear? Aren't these the children that? I know who they are, Mother. Rei interjected, her voice sharp with emotion. But, Rei, you can't expect me to leave you alone with them. Her mother argued, her tone rising. She couldn't comprehend how her daughter could still stand by these 2 after everything that had happened. To her, the village would be better off if they were simply left to fend for themselves. Rei's mother softened her voice, trying again. Sweetheart, please, just let me send them away. Nothing good will come from. No. You listen to me, Mother, Rei interrupted, her tone firm but unwavering. These 2 have done nothing to deserve the way they've been treated. Kakashi wasn't responsible for that mission's failure, he wasn't even there. But people still blamed him and his father, as if he had been part of it. And everything that followed? The village is just as much at fault for that. Kakashi is here, serving his home with honor, just as any dedicated shinobi would. And as for Naruko, Rei continued, her voice filled with conviction, she saved this village, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. These 2 don't deserve the scorn and mistreatment they've endured. So don't you dare call either of them monsters. The room fell into an eerie silence. Rei's children sat wide-eyed, having never witnessed their mother speaking so firmly to their grandmother before. At their young ages, 5, 3, and 2, they couldn't fully grasp the conversation, but they could sense the tension in the air. Kakashi stood near the door, holding Naruko close, ready to leave at a moment's notice to ensure her safety. Naruko remained quiet, instinctively pressing herself as close as possible to her older brother, her small arms wrapped around him tightly. Her face was buried against the side of Kakashi's neck, a familiar comfort whenever she sensed unease around her. Rei's mother first looked at her daughter in disbelief, then turned to Kakashi with a sharp, disapproving expression. After a brief pause, she shook her head and turned her gaze back to Rei. All right, Rei, I'll let this go for now, she said, her tone more like that of an adult pacifying a child. But this conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot. Rei exhaled a weary sigh and spoke with quiet urgency. Please, just take the children to the cafeteria and get them something to eat. They haven't had lunch yet, right? Just this once, can you do this for me? She fought to keep her emotions in check, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Her mother studied her for a moment before finally gathering the children and leaving without another word. Kakashi stepped aside as they passed, and the door closed gently behind them. "I'm sorry, Kakashi," Rei murmured, her gaze fixed on the door. When Kakashi remained where he stood, she spoke again, her voice softer this time, hoping to reassure him. "Hey, it's okay now. I'm really glad you both came to see me. Please, have a seat. My mother won't be back for another 30 minutes, and I need to talk to you. Please?" Kakashi studied her carefully. It had become second nature to assess situations like this. He trusted that Rei wasn't a threat to them, but he still needed to see it in her eyes, her posture, and hear it in her tone before fully relaxing. After a few moments, he finally walked over to the chair beside the bed and sat down, placing Naruko in his lap. "Thank you," Rei said with relief. "I want you to know that I have never believed the rumors or the unfair things people in the village have said about you, Kakashi. You are too kind-hearted and loyal for their accusations to be true." "Thank you, Rei," Kakashi murmured, though his gaze remained on Naruko rather than Rei. Rei hesitated before asking, "Would it be all right if I held Naruko for a little while?" "Yeah, of course," Kakashi replied, gently shifting to pass Naruko to her. But as soon as Naruko saw Rei, she whimpered and clung tightly to Kakashi, burying her face against his neck. Kakashi tried again. "Hey, little sis, it's okay. It's Rei. Don't you want to see Rei?" Naruko peeked over at Rei but made no move to go to her. To Naruko, Rei was still linked to the fear and chaos of what had happened earlier. She wasn't able to separate the person from the situation just yet. Rei swallowed hard. Not long ago, this little one would greet her with bright smiles and reach out to her with open arms. Now, all she could see in Naruko's eyes was hesitation and uncertainty. She sighed. "It's okay, Kakashi. I understand." "I'm sorry, Rei," Kakashi said, feeling a deep sense of guilt. He wished he could undo the fear Naruko felt. No. This reaction is understandable," Rei reassured him. "What do you mean?" "You saw how my mother reacted, right? Unfortunately, she isn't the only one in my family who feels that way. Some of them are already talking about taking my 3 little ones away from me if I continue to help you." Even with his mask, Kakashi's expression darkened. "I knew I couldn't ask you to stay with us forever," Kakashi admitted softly. "I truly appreciate everything you've done for us, Rei. I knew I was asking a lot from you, but I didn't know anything about raising a baby. I needed your help, and I was selfish about it. I knew it could put you and your family in a difficult position, and for that, I'm sorry." "Kakashi, please don't apologize. You did nothing wrong. This entire situation happened because of someone else's choices. The 4th Hokage did everything he could to protect the village. That's why, when the Hokage came to me and asked if I would help you learn how to care for Naruko and give you breaks when you needed them, I agreed immediately. It was my way of honoring the 4th for what he did for all of us. But now, seeing how the village has reacted, I'm ashamed of them. And I'm also sorry for my husband's involvement in all of this. Your husband was just trying to protect his family. I can't blame him anymore, not after the Hokage explained why he made the choices he did. Honestly, Rei, I don't think I would have reacted much differently if I were in his position." "You don't have to say that, Kakashi. We both know that my husband panicked. There were other ways to handle things, and it shouldn't have unfolded the way it did. Still, I love Tomoya. He was afraid because he knew how the village would react. He was scared they would turn against us for supporting you and Naruko. I understand that fear, so I forgive him." Rei's voice wavered, and tears welled in her eyes. Kakashi could see how much she was holding back, so he gently spoke the words that needed to be said. "Rei, I want you to know that Naruko and I were grateful to have you with us. But it's time for you to focus on your own family. You have 3 little ones who need you more than ever now. I can take care of Naruko on my own now. You've given me everything I need to make sure she not only survives but thrives. Please, take care of your children and give them the same love and warmth you've given us. Don't worry about us, we'll be okay, thanks to you." Rei wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "Maybe I can come over sometime? Just now and then, to check in and see how you two are doing?" she asked, hopeful. "I'm sorry, Rei. I truly believe it's best for all of us to move forward," Kakashi said gently. "You mentioned that your mother and other relatives are considering taking custody of your children if you continue on this path. I don't want to add to your burden. This is for the best. I'm sure we'll see each other around the village. Naruko won't stay little forever, and I plan to take her to the park. Since we live in the same place, our paths are bound to cross again." Kakashi tried to keep his tone warm and optimistic for Rei's sake, but deep down, they both understood the reality of the situation. Rei gave a small, bittersweet smile. "You're right, Kakashi. We do live in the same village. So, I suppose we will see each other again. Hopefully soon." "We should get going," Kakashi said, glancing at the clock. "Our time is almost up." "Yeah," Rei agreed quietly. Kakashi reached out and gently squeezed Rei's hand, a silent gesture of understanding and farewell. Rei squeezed back, holding on to the moment. Then, Kakashi stood up and turned his attention to Naruko, who had lifted her head and was looking curiously at Rei. Kakashi took hold of Naruko's small hand and guided her in a waving motion. "Naruko, wave bye-bye to Rei," he encouraged. Naruko's little arm moved in an uneven, enthusiastic wave. She grinned when Rei waved back. With that, Kakashi carried Naruko across the room and stepped out, closing the door softly behind them. Rei watched them leave, tears quietly slipping down her face. "I failed them." The thought weighed heavily on her heart. Kakashi moved swiftly as he left the hospital, eager to return home. With a quick teleportation technique, he arrived at the outskirts of the village, heading toward the familiar comfort of his home. He longed for a peaceful moment with his little sister, away from the weight of the outside world. Once inside, Kakashi walked to the breakfast nook and carefully placed Naruko in the high chair beside the table. Ensuring she was secure, he turned toward the refrigerator and gathered ingredients for a simple lunch, a tuna salad sandwich with fresh mango slices for himself, while Naruko would have mashed sweet potatoes, creamed chicken, and a serving of strained peaches for dessert. As he prepared the meal, he noticed Naruko reaching toward him, her little hands stretching out with determination. At first, he assumed she was excited for her food, but after a few moments, he realized she was reaching for his face instead. "Ah, sorry, little one," Kakashi said with a small chuckle. "My mind is all over the place today." Leaning closer, he allowed Naruko to grab onto his mask, her tiny fingers tugging at the fabric. With Kakashi's help, she managed to pull it down under his chin, revealing his face. "Wow, I must be really distracted," he thought to himself. "If Naruko hadn't fussed, I might have tried to eat my sandwich with my mask still on." He sighed, amused at his own absent-mindedness. Naruko's face lit up as she placed a hand on his cheek. "Kaka!" she chirped happily. Kakashi smiled. "Yes, little one, it's me. Now, how about a big bite of creamed chicken, huh?" Naruko nodded eagerly, and Kakashi carefully fed her a spoonful of food. At the same time, he grabbed his sandwich and took a bite himself. They continued their meal in peace, though Naruko occasionally squealed in delight, waving her arms excitedly. As she tried to hold her baby spoon, she ended up making quite the mess. Food landed on both of them, even speckling their hair. Kakashi laughed, unable to help himself, and his laughter was quickly echoed by Naruko's own giggles. Once they had finished eating, Kakashi carried Naruko to the bathroom, knowing a cleanup was necessary. After giving her a warm bath, he dressed her in a fresh diaper and placed her safely on the bed while he changed. He kept a watchful eye on her, knowing how quickly she had learned to move. Pakun, his loyal ninja hound, had taken it upon himself to teach Naruko how to crawl. Kakashi still remembered the sight of the small pug dropping onto his belly and dragging himself across the floor, demonstrating the movement for Naruko. She had watched intently before attempting to mimic him, her little face scrunched in determination. Within minutes, she was crawling after Pakun with pure joy. The memory brought a smile to Kakashi's face. It's these small moments that make life worth it. These moments remind me why I keep going. A tear welled up in his eye as he thought about his late sensei and Kushina. You both saw it, didn't you? Even before I realized it myself. You knew what I needed. You believed in me. Kakashi took a deep breath and looked at Naruko, who gazed back at him with bright, innocent eyes. She was his reason to keep moving forward. And for her, he always would. Naruko was always attuned to the emotions of those around her. She paused her playful movements on the bed and glanced up at her older brother, sensing something was amiss. Without hesitation, she began crawling toward the edge of the bed. Kakashi, concerned that she might get too close to the edge, quickly moved forward. Just in time, he reached for her, lifting her safely into his arms. Hey, little one. You need to be more careful, all right? You almost took a tumble there, Kakashi said with relief. Naruko, however, seemed less concerned about his warning and more focused on understanding what was bothering her big brother. Kaka? She murmured, her voice filled with concern. She could sense something was wrong, but she couldn't quite figure out what. A soft whimper escaped her as she continued studying Kakashi's face. What's the matter, Naruko? Kakashi asked, puzzled by her reaction. The answer soon became clear as Naruko reached up with her tiny hand and wiped away a tear that had trickled down his chin. She wasn't upset for herself, she was reacting to his emotions. The memory of their parents had resurfaced, and despite his efforts to stay strong, it had affected him. Realizing this, Kakashi quickly tried to soothe her. Hey, little sis, it's okay. I didn't mean to make you sad, he reassured her, gently swaying from side to side. His comforting tone and movements seemed to work, and soon enough, Naruko was ready to return to her playful mood. Now that he was dressed in a simple pair of boxers, Kakashi adjusted Naruko in his arms. She clung to his side the way little ones often do when carried, her tiny legs wrapped securely around him. One of her hands rested on his shoulder while the other dangled freely. With ease, Kakashi picked up Naruko's beloved fox plushie from the bed, her favorite toy that hardly ever left her side, and headed downstairs to the playroom. As soon as they entered, Kakashi set Naruko down and watched as she eagerly crawled across the soft carpet. He placed the fox plushie nearby before heading over to his desk in the corner of the room. The space served a dual purpose, it was both a playroom and a study. Kakashi had arranged it this way so he could keep an eye on Naruko while working on reports once he resumed his missions. The walls were painted a soft sky blue, and the room was thoughtfully designed for both comfort and function. A crib stood in the far right corner, with a changing table beside it. Across the room, a large toy box sat against the opposite wall. A medium-sized window between the crib and toy box let in natural light, brightening the space. The center of the room was intentionally left open, providing plenty of space for play on the thick charcoal gray carpet. Kakashi settled into a comfortable leather chair, turning slightly so he could watch his little sister for a moment. A few toys were already scattered from an earlier play session, and he made a mental note to tidy up before bedtime. Naruko had made her way to a set of soft, foam-covered blocks and was happily stacking them. Kakashi smiled at the sight before turning to his desk. He picked up a scroll and began writing in it, a journal documenting Naruko's growth and development. He kept track of her sleeping habits, her emerging personality traits, and any changes in her routine. Each entry was dated, ensuring that if anything unusual happened, they would have a detailed record to share with the doctors if needed. As he continued writing, Kakashi glanced up occasionally, watching his little sister play. Despite the challenges they had faced, moments like this reminded him how important it was to cherish their time together. They spent the afternoon in the playroom. Kakashi finished writing in his journal and then focused on creating a new training schedule for himself. Now that Naruko would be with him constantly, he needed to adjust his routine to accommodate her. To ensure her safety while he trained, Kakashi planned to rely on his ninken for assistance, making sure the little one didn't wander into danger. Additionally, he would need to carry a few extra supplies for Naruko, including a warm blanket, some toys, a bottle, and a couple of diapers. This meant Kakashi would have to take breaks to tend to her needs, but he accepted this responsibility without hesitation. Still, Kakashi felt a little uneasy about bringing Naruko along to his training sessions. He was concerned about exposing her too soon to the life of a ninja. Unlike others, he never had the opportunity to choose his own path, his destiny had been decided for him from a young age. The missions and duties he had undertaken for the village had stripped away his childhood far too soon. Reflecting on his past, he often questioned whether that was truly the right way to raise a child. The Third Great Ninja War had forced his entire generation to mature too quickly, and in many ways, they had all suffered because of it. For now, there weren't many alternatives. He could leave Naruko with his ninken, as they were more than capable of watching over her for a few hours. However, after what had happened previously, Kakashi was hesitant. His protective instincts urged him to keep her close. Rei had never given him a reason to doubt her reliability, and the Hokage had chosen her wisely. Yet, Kakashi still wondered, who else could he turn to? Who could help without facing consequences for simply offering support? Pushing those thoughts aside, he finished his revised schedule and rolled up the scroll. Looking across the room, Kakashi noticed that Naruko was growing restless with her toys. She had begun to crawl toward him, seeking attention. Recognizing that it was time for her nap, Kakashi met her halfway, gently lifted her into his arms, and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. Carrying her upstairs, he settled onto the bed, allowing Naruko to rest on his chest. She fell asleep almost instantly, and before long, Kakashi drifted off as well, peacefully resting alongside his little sister. 2 hours had passed, and the night had not been without its moments. Kakashi had woken up rather abruptly, stirring Naruko from her rest as well. The young girl was clinging tightly to her older brother, her small hands grasping at him for comfort. It was this that had finally pulled Kakashi from his uneasy sleep, as he felt a dull ache from the pressure. Kakashi had been having a restless dream, not the most distressing, but troubling enough to make him shift in his sleep. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered that Naruko was lying on top of him, so he had unconsciously restrained his movements to avoid disturbing her. Still, his shifting had caused Naruko to wake, and she was now doing her best to stay still despite her concern. Since Kakashi hadn't worn a shirt to bed, Naruko's small hands could only grip onto his skin in an attempt to hold onto him. After a few moments, she let out a quiet whimper, watching her brother with worried eyes. Eventually, Kakashi became aware of the discomfort in his chest and the weight resting on him. As soon as his mind caught up, he realized Naruko was there. He sat up instantly, his mismatched eyes meeting her deep blue ones, which were filled with concern. "Sorry, little sister. I didn't mean to worry you," Kakashi reassured her. The moment his eyes opened, Naruko released her hold, though she reached up and placed a tiny hand on his face as if seeking reassurance. Kakashi gently kissed her hand before shifting into a seated position. Now sitting up properly, he placed Naruko comfortably on his lap. Just then, both of their stomachs let out loud grumbles. "Well, I think that's our cue to eat," Kakashi chuckled. With that, he rose from the bed and carried Naruko downstairs to the kitchen. He placed her in her high chair, making sure she had her favorite plush fox before heading to prepare their meal. Once the food was ready, the two ate together, enjoying the warmth of their morning routine. As they finished, Kakashi decided it was time for a change of scenery. "Naruko, would you like to go outside?" he asked with a smile. The moment Naruko heard her name and the word outside, she let out a joyful squeal, clapping her hands excitedly. "Well, I guess that answers that," Kakashi said, amused by her enthusiasm. "How about we bring the ninken with us?" Another delighted squeal followed, making Kakashi grin. "Then it's decided," he said. They quickly wrapped up their meal, and Kakashi placed the dishes in the sink to wash later. Then, he carried Naruko upstairs so they could both get dressed for the day. Once they were properly dressed, Kakashi grabbed his keys, picked up Naruko, and stepped outside. As soon as they were outside, Kakashi performed his summoning technique, calling forth his loyal pack of ninja dogs. "Hey, boss, what's up?" Pakun greeted, tilting his head curiously. "We're going to explore the backyard. Naruko hasn't been out here yet, and I wanted to give her a chance to see it and play for a bit. I thought you all might like to join us, and help me keep an eye on her." "Will do, boss. The little one is growing on all of us," Pakun said, giving himself a shake. "She's quickly becoming part of the pack." "I'm glad to hear that, Pakun. I was hoping you all would warm up to her sooner rather than later," Kakashi said as he gently set Naruko down on the grass. Both the ninja and the dogs watched as Naruko experienced the sensation of grass for the first time. On all fours, she stared curiously at the green, spiky surface beneath her. Unsure of what to make of it, she reached out and tugged at a few blades. When a small handful came loose, she examined them before attempting to put them in her mouth. Kakashi chuckled and quickly reached down, gently taking hold of her wrist to keep her from tasting the grass. "No, Naruko, that's not for eating. You can play on it, run on it, and even take a nap on it, but you should never put it in your mouth." Naruko looked up at her older brother with a bright smile and a giggle. Once Kakashi set her down, she waved her arms a few times before spotting Bull, the large mastiff. Without hesitation, she eagerly crawled toward him. Bull wagged his tail and lowered his head, giving the little one a gentle, affectionate lick on her forehead. The movement, though soft, still managed to knock Naruko onto her back. However, she wasn't startled or upset. Instead, she let out another giggle, rolled over, and continued crawling toward Bull until she was close enough to sit comfortably. Bull settled beside her, allowing the baby to pat his fur with tiny, delighted hands. The two remained in the yard for about half an hour before heading out for a stroll through the forest. As the sun began to set, they made their way back home. Once inside, everyone gathered in the living room to relax for a while. Before long, it was time for bed. The Ninken stayed with them that night, as they often did. Kakashi took care of Naruko's bath and gave her a bottle before gently placing her in her bassinet, tucking her in with care. Once she was sound asleep, he headed downstairs to wash the dishes from supper. As he stood at the sink, his thoughts drifted. It wouldn't be long before he had to return to active duty. The Hokage had assured him that he would be given leave until Naruko turned 2. By then, she would be eating solid food, still in diapers but more independent. The Hokage had also arranged for trusted caregivers to look after her when needed. Kakashi wasn't sure how he felt about that. He wanted to return to his duties, being a ninja was all he had ever known. But at the same time, could he really leave Naruko in someone else's care? His mind wrestled with the dilemma as he placed the last dish in the cabinet. He had to admit that protecting the village was something he valued deeply. Even if some people in the village didn't accept them, this was still their home. If he had been alone, if Sensei hadn't taken him in, he might have chosen a different path. But Sensei and Kushina had never turned their backs on him. They had given him a place to belong, a reason to stay. And now, Naruko was his responsibility. He would protect her, just as Sensei had protected him. If, when she grew older, the village still refused to see her for who she truly was, Kakashi was prepared to take her somewhere else, somewhere she could be happy and free. With that thought, he left the kitchen and headed upstairs. Some of the Ninken had remained with Naruko, while the rest had stayed downstairs. Now, they followed Kakashi back up to his room. Before settling in, he checked on Naruko. She was sleeping peacefully, her tiny hands curled up near her face. Seeing her safe and content, Kakashi finally climbed into bed. Pakun curled up at his side, while Guruko stretched out at his feet. Soon, the house was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of steady breathing. And with that, the Hatake home drifted into peaceful slumber. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the village, while Kakashi was contemplating what the future might hold for him and Naruko, 3 individuals had gathered in the Hokage's office. 2 of them sat across from the 3rd Hokage's desk, exuding an air of self-importance. Like the Hokage himself, they were elders of the village and held significant influence in Konoha's governing body. The two elders, Homura Mitokado and Koharu Utatane, had arrived with a matter that had been bothering them for quite some time. They were seeking an explanation regarding the Hokage's handling of both Kakashi and the young Jinchuriki, Naruko. However, the third was less than pleased. He had been looking forward to heading home, having a quiet dinner, taking a relaxing shower, and unwinding before bed. The last thing he wanted was to sit through another tedious discussion about matters he believed were not their concern. His irritation seeped into his tone as he responded to them. "Sarutobi, explain to us again why the so-called traitor has not been reinstated to active duty," Homura asked, his voice tinged with dissatisfaction. Sarutobi let out a small snort before replying. "It's interesting that you label Kakashi a traitor, yet at the same time, you insist on having him return to duty so quickly. That seems rather contradictory, don't you think?" "Humph. She may appear loyal now, but that won't last forever. Her father remained faithful for years before ultimately betraying us. It's only a matter of time before the child follows in his footsteps. Until then, we will utilize her for the village's needs," Homura stated with a dismissive scoff. "Regardless, answer our question, Hiruzen." "We have a right to know," Koharu interjected, her irritation evident. "Naruko is still too young to care for herself. Unless either of you know a technique that accelerates aging, I will not be assigning Kakashi any new responsibilities until she is ready," the third Hokage responded, his tone firm as he met their gazes with a sharp, unwavering stare. "And even if such a technique existed, I would still refuse. Do you not remember the fourth Hokage's wishes?" "Of course we do," Koharu replied impatiently. "But that doesn't mean Hatake should be absent for so long. 2 years is excessive," she argued, her voice rising in frustration. Homura nodded in agreement. "No, I believe the ones being unreasonable here are you two," Hiruzen countered. "I had already sent Rei Sarahara to assist with the child, and we all know how that turned out. If I send another caretaker, what guarantees do we have that the outcome will be any different? The child should be placed in the orphanage until she is old enough to live independently. The caretaker there would manage her well enough, especially with proper compensation for the responsibility," Homura suggested, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Hiruzen's patience had reached its limit. His expression darkened as he slammed his fist onto the desk. "That is absolutely out of the question," he declared with authority. "The orphanage would never be able to find Naruko a proper home, and even if someone did take her in, it wouldn't be for the right reasons. She deserves a safe and supportive environment, not one where she would be mistreated." "The caretaker would ensure her safety," Koharu insisted. "She could be instructed not to arrange an adoption and simply house Naruko until she turns 3. At that point, we could provide her with an apartment." Hiruzen narrowed his eyes. "Let me be clear. You are suggesting placing a 3-year-old child in an apartment, alone? Without guidance or proper supervision? What in the world is wrong with you two?" His disbelief was evident as he stared at his former teammates. Their growing hostility toward an innocent child was becoming intolerable. He fought the urge to expel them from his office right then and there. "We are not saying she would be left completely on her own," Homura countered. "Someone would visit regularly to check on her, teach her how to use basic appliances, and provide a monthly allowance while instructing her on financial responsibility. And Hiruzen, you know as well as we do that many children in other villages survive with far less than what this child is receiving." Hiruzen had heard enough. "This conversation is over. Leave my office now, or I will have the guards escort you out." His voice was cold and final. "Naruko Uzumaki will remain under the care of her legal guardian, Kakashi Hatake, as outlined in the guardianship documents and in accordance with the fourth Hokage's wishes." A tense silence filled the room as the three elders locked eyes in an unspoken battle of wills. Then, without another word, Homura and Koharu rose from their seats and exited. Hiruzen exhaled deeply, his mind drifting to memories of their younger years when they had once been close allies. Time had changed them, and now their growing resentment toward the new Jinchuriki puzzled him. They had never reacted this way when Kushina was brought to the village to fulfill the same role. So what had changed? With a weary sigh, he rose from his chair, shutting the door behind him. One thought remained firm in his mind: he would ensure that Naruko and her guardian would not be separated. Meanwhile, Homura and Koharu walked down the dimly lit street, heading toward a small establishment nearby. Their expressions remained grim, knowing Danzo would not be pleased with the outcome of their meeting. Upon entering the quiet bar, they found a secluded table near the back and took their seats. A server approached, inquiring about their orders. After a brief discussion, they settled on a bottle of sake. As the server left to retrieve their drinks, Homura turned to Koharu, his expression indicating that their conversation was far from over. "I believe Hiruzen has grown too lenient toward the Jinchuriki," he murmured. Koharu nodded in agreement. "It's possible that the child is influencing his judgment somehow." "I wouldn't rule out that possibility," Homura replied, pausing as the server returned with their drinks. The man placed the bottle and cups before them before departing. "What should our next course of action be?" Koharu asked, her tone measured. We must inform Danzo. He will not be pleased, that much is certain." Koharu gazed into her cup thoughtfully before speaking. "I agree with you. Those documents Lord Third mentioned should never have ended up in the hands of a traitor. If some of the other council members hadn't been so sentimental about the fourth, this wouldn't even be a problem. Still, Danzo will find a way. He didn't seem as troubled as I expected when the decision was announced. He plans to gain control over the Jinchuriki and utilize her to protect the village. I'm not sure how he intends to accomplish that, but I'm willing to support his efforts." "Then it's settled. Tomorrow, we'll request an audience with our ally and hear his thoughts on the matter." Homura took a swift sip of sake before pouring himself another. Koharu did the same. As their discussion continued, the topic shifted to other affairs within the village, matters spoken of in vague terms, ensuring that Konoha's most well-guarded secrets remain just that. Dear YouTube family, that's a wrap for now. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more exciting and creative fanfic videos. Your support means the world. Stay tuned for more. Best regards, Anime Octopus.